Chapter 221. Suffice it to say, after that incident last night, I had one of the best sleeps in my life. And yet, waking up felt like slamming into a brick wall of reality. My brain, still sluggish, struggled to piece together the events of the previous night. Rachel. The Rachel I knew. Bubbly, bright, full of warmth but always keeping a careful distance, had flipped a switch. The way she had acted, the way she had looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered, the way she had kissed me like she was staking a claim. None of it aligned with the Rachel from the novel or even the Rachel I had come to know in this world. I ran a hand down my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Did that really happen? I thought, because it felt like a dream, one of those strange ones that made perfect sense when you were in it but left you bewildered when you woke up. Shouldn't you be happy? Luna's voice chimed in my mind. From what I can tell, you like her too. So what's the issue? Yeah, agreed. I sighed. I did like her. Last night had been something else. Something that left my heart pounding and my head spinning. But there was a deeper issue gnawing at me, one I hadn't voiced to anyone. The fact that I had transmigrated here, that this body wasn't originally mine, still haunted me. I had accepted this world as real. I had made my place in it. But the lingering fear remained. What if I lost this body? What if one day I woke up and it wasn't mine anymore? That thought unsettled me in a way nothing else did. But honestly, last night was refreshing. Luna continued, her tone far too amused. It's the first time you've had such a reaction. Huh? I thought you were a... Shut up, I muttered, shaking my head as a deep red spread across my cheeks. Luna snickered. It was a natural reaction, I defended myself, though even in my own mind it sounded weak. Because last night hadn't just been a kiss. Rachel had deliberately provoked me, reveling in my reaction. I shuddered slightly, pushing the thoughts aside as I moved to get ready. I had already slept in way too long, and the party was going to start soon. After showering, I put on the formal attire prepared for the event, adjusting the cuffs of my sleeves as I took one last glance in the mirror. I looked decent.
Presentable.
Nothing too flashy, but fitting for the occasion. Then, just as I was finishing up, a knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. I slid the door open. Rachel stood there, radiant as ever. She wore a flowing golden dress, fitted perfectly to her figure, shimmering under the light. Diamonds adorned her neck, sapphires hung from her ears, and yet none of it outshone the brightness of her expression. "Hey, Arthur," she greeted, her voice light, but her cheeks tinged with the faintest pink. I blinked for half a second, processing. Then I offered her a small smile. "Happy birthday, Rachel." She laughed softly. "You already wished me, you know?" Her gaze flickered, suddenly avoiding mine. Last night. For once, it seemed she was more bashful than teasing. Her face turned a deeper shade of red. I chuckled, but before I could say anything, she slipped her arm through mine. "Anyway, you're my escort. Come with me," she said, her grip firm but warm. "As you wish, princess," I replied smoothly. She hummed in thought, then glanced at me through her lashes. "Calling me princess sounds too impersonal," she murmured, voice quiet but clear. "Add my before it." She refused to meet my gaze, staring intently at the floor as her blush deepened to an almost impossible shade of red. I stared at her, trying to process what I just heard. Wow! Rachel, normally so confident and forward, had just requested that in a straight voice. And the worst part? She was so damn cute while doing it. Every time I thought I had a grasp on her, she flipped the script. And now, with her arm hooked through mine, the warmth of her presence pressed close, and the faint scent of something floral lingering in the air, my brain wasn't exactly at full processing speed. The hall where Rachel's Sweet 16 was being held loomed ahead, its grand doors wide open, spilling warm golden light into the corridor. Even from outside, the low hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the steady murmur of a live orchestra set the tone. The kind of event that reeked of wealth and power. 2 guards stood at the entrance, their posture rigid as they assessed us. A brief nod, a quiet exchange, and then, Second Princess of the North, Her Highness Rachel Creighton, and Rank 1 of Mythos Academy, Arthur Nightingale, are entering. Just like that, every pair of eyes in the hall turned toward us. A sea of people. Faces I recognized, nobles, officials, the elite of the northern continent. Some had been at Cecilia's Sweet 16. Some were powerful figures in their own right. And some were already assessing me, their gazes sharp, calculating. But none of them mattered at that moment, because my eyes locked onto a single figure. Alastor Creighton, one of the two kings of the North, a nine-circle mage, a man whose sheer presence was enough to command the attention of the entire hall. And more importantly, Rachel's very, very protective father. Now, Alastor and I weren't exactly strangers. He had trained me in spellcasting, handed me the Laplace method, even gifted me the skull of the Archlich, all because he wanted me to surpass Lucifer. In a way, he was an ally, but not when it came to his daughter. His gaze was like a blade against my skin, cold, measuring, and far from pleased. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. Then, just to make things worse, Rachel leaned in, her breath warm against my ear, her voice soft but teasing. "Pfft, you were so cute." I stiffened, and Alastor's eyes narrowed. "Did you do that on purpose?" I whispered, keeping my voice low. Rachel simply shrugged, her expression the picture of innocence, if innocence had dimples and a barely hidden smirk. I exhaled through my nose, forcing myself to keep a neutral face as we stepped further into the hall. Rachel was a princess. Everyone here knew her, the future saintess, the golden jewel of the North. But they also knew me, the rank one who defeated Lucifer, the boy who made a lich at just white rank, the one who danced with another princess at her birthday. A storm of rumors swirled in this room, and tonight, Rachel had just thrown another match into the fire. A single chime from a crystalline bell rang through the hall, silencing the murmuring crowd in an instant. Alastor Creighton stepped forward, his imposing figure standing tall at the center of the room. The dim glow of lights cast a faint shimmer on his dark blue ceremonial robes, the intricate embroidery of the Creighton sigil, a silver eagle against a backdrop of frost, glinting under the chandeliers. With a voice that could command armies, he spoke. "Thank you all for attending tonight," he began, his gaze sweeping across the hall. "As you all know, today is a momentous occasion. My beloved daughter, Rachel Creighton, comes of age." There was a pause, just long enough to let the words settle. "My daughter, who will one day take up the mantle of Saintess of the North and continue the legacy of the Creighton family, is stepping into her 16th year. Let us celebrate her today, not just as a princess, but as the brilliant, compassionate, and powerful young woman she is." The crowd erupted in applause. Rachel, still linked to my arm, beamed. But despite her usual brightness, I could feel the slight tension in her grip. She was never one for big formalities. After the clapping died down, she let go of me and stepped forward. With the grace of royalty and the ease of someone used to commanding attention, she smiled and raised a hand. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she said, her voice ringing clearly through the hall. "I know you're all incredibly busy, and yet you made time to be here. It means more to me than I can say." A chorus of polite nods followed. "I hope you all enjoy the evening," she continued, flashing a playful grin. "Because I certainly plan to." That earned a few chuckles, even a few raised glasses. Rachel had that effect on people. Then her sapphire eyes flickered toward me. Her smile changed. Something softer. Something just for me. She turned to the center of the hall where the polished marble floor reflected the golden glow of the chandeliers. The music swelled, shifting into something elegant and fluid. A waltz. She extended her hand toward me, tilting her head ever so slightly. "Arthur," she said, her voice playful but carrying a quiet expectation. "Dance with me." There was no hesitation. I took her hand. Gasps rippled through the crowd, whispers buzzing through the hall like static. But I ignored them all. Rachel led me to the center, her fingers curling around mine with gentle but firm confidence. The first note struck, and we moved. Dancing was something I had only picked up after coming to this world, but I had learned quickly. I had danced with Cecilia at her birthday, but Rachel was something else entirely. Unlike Cecilia's teasing precision or Serafina's quiet elegance, Rachel danced with joy. Pure un filter di joy. She spun, the golden fabric of her dress flaring like liquid sunlight. Her laughter was barely contained, her eyes gleaming as if she were having the time of her life. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just a formal birthday dance. For Rachel, this was freedom. With every step, every twirl, she wasn't just moving. She was escaping. From the expectations, from the weight of her future, from the past that haunted her. And she was dragging me with her. I let her. I matched her steps, guiding when needed, following when she wanted me to. The music swelled, the violins soaring, and for that fleeting moment, the world outside the dance floor didn't exist. There was only us. Chapter 222. The moment the dance ended, Rachel reluctantly let go of my hand, and I excused myself to make my way through the crowd. There were still plenty of people to greet, and among them were my friends from Class 1A. Naturally, Rose Springshaper was here, dressed in a flowing emerald gown that complemented her features. Serafina, ever composed, offered me a soft smile from a distance, her silver hair catching the chandelier's glow. Cecilia, on the other hand, had no such reservations. I barely had time to brace myself before she launched forward and wrapped her arms around me. "I missed you," she murmured into my shoulder. I chuckled, patting her back. "It hasn't been that long, Cecilia." "Long enough?" she huffed, pulling back slightly. Then, with a wicked little smirk, she whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "I want to kidnap you." I tensed. Before I could plan an escape route, Rachel materialized at my side like a golden storm, expertly peeling Cecilia away from me with a practiced motion. "Arthur is mine," Rachel declared, her sapphire eyes practically daring Cecilia to challenge her. Cecilia, not one to back down, tilted her head with a smile that was far too sweet. "Oh, you wish, Saintess." The temperature in the room dropped a few degrees as they locked eyes, an invisible battle of wills igniting between them. I took that as my cue to make myself scarce. Rose fell into step beside me as I slipped away. "Smart move. Never get between two girls fighting," I muttered, shaking my head. "That's a lesson for survival." Rose laughed, her dark eyes twinkling. "Took you long enough to learn that. You'd be dead if you tried stopping those two." I nodded in agreement. She hesitated for a second, then tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "By the way, I'll be at the Tower of Magic too. We can spend some time together there." Her voice softened, and a faint blush dusted her cheeks. "I mean, you're spending time with Rachel now, and that's fine. It's her birthday, but maybe we can have some alone time later?" I met her gaze and smiled. "Of course, Rose. I'd love that." She beamed at me, the usual cool composure of the elven princess cracking just a little, before quickly excusing herself back into the crowd. I exhaled. Rachel and Cecilia were still at it, Serafina now caught between them like a very elegant hostage. "Yeah. Probably best to stay far away from that." "Arthur, it's been some time." A familiar voice pulled me back to reality. I turned, already recognizing the speaker before I saw him. Lucifer Windward stood there, his golden hair catching the chandelier's glow, his verdant eyes sharp and assessing. He looked the same, but he felt different, stronger. He's already started the integration process, I thought. His mana had tripled in both quality and quantity, making the gap between us considerable. A few months ago I'd beaten him, but right now, if we fought, he'd flatten me. Annoying, I admitted to myself, but it was expected. Lucifer had always been ahead in raw power. I wasn't supposed to catch up until December. I schooled my expression into a smile and extended a hand. "Good to see you, Lucifer," I said. His grip was firm as he shook my hand, his smile far more genuine than it used to be. It seemed he'd stopped seeing people as puzzle pieces meant to fit into his grand heroic narrative. That was an improvement. "This is my cousin, Lilith Windward," Lucifer introduced, stepping aside slightly. The woman beside him was a mirror of Lucifer. Same golden hair, same striking green eyes. But there was something more refined about her, something sharper. She carried herself with the ease of someone who knew exactly how dangerous she was. Lilith Windward. In the novel, she would one day become a peak immortal rank swordswoman, one of the strongest beneath the radiant level. And she would die protecting Lucifer. Right now, though, she was merely mid-immortal rank. Still leagues beyond me. "My cousin told me quite a bit about you," Lilith said, her voice cool but not unfriendly. "You're the one who knocked some sense into him." Lucifer sighed. "Must you phrase it that way?" I chuckled. "I wouldn't say I knocked sense into him. He was already figuring it out." Lilith raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Humility's an admirable trait, Arthur, but I have no patience for false modesty. My cousin was unbearable before. Less so now. That's thanks to you." Lucifer frowned. "I was not unbearable." Lilith ignored him. "I owe you my thanks for that. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll let you two talk." She glanced at Lucifer. "Don't do anything stupid." "I never do," he said dryly. Lilith's expression made it clear she strongly disagreed. Then, with a graceful turn, she strode away, leaving me alone with Lucifer. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, just unfamiliar. The last time we talked, there had still been a thick layer of rivalry between us. Now, felt more natural. So, I said, leaning against one of the polished marble columns. Integration process, huh? Lucifer nodded. I started about 2 weeks ago. It's progressing smoothly. I can tell. You feel a lot stronger. He smirked. I am. If we fought now, I'd win. Enjoy it while it lasts, I said easily. I'll catch up soon enough. Lucifer chuckled. I don't doubt it. You're unpredictable. Annoyingly so. I grinned. That's the goal. Lucifer exhaled, glancing around the ballroom. This kind of event still feels strange to me. Rachel fits in effortlessly, but I've never been comfortable at these things. I raised an eyebrow. You're a prince. And yet, he said, tilting his head. I prefer a battlefield to a ballroom. I understood the sentiment. We lapsed into a comfortable silence, watching the party unfold. A few months ago, we were competitors, wary of each other, locked in an inevitable clash. Now, Lucifer Windward was beginning to feel like a friend. The music shifted to a slower tempo, and the dance floor filled with couples swaying under the golden chandeliers. Rachel had been my first dance, but the night was still young, and I had 3 more waiting for their turn. I turned just as a familiar pair of violet eyes locked onto mine. Cecilia stood there, lips curled into a knowing smirk, her deep auburn dress hugging her figure perfectly. Her sapphire earrings gleamed under the lights as she extended a hand toward me. Her posture relaxed but her gaze sharp. Well, she said smoothly. My turn, isn't it? I took her hand, leading her onto the dance floor. The moment I placed my hand on her waist and she rested hers on my shoulder, she leaned in slightly. What exactly did you do to Rachel? She murmured, just loud enough for me to hear over the music. I blinked. What? You heard me? Cecilia said, tilting her head. She's completely gone for you, more than usual. She even called you my Arthur earlier. My Arthur. Do you know how dangerous that is for you? I swallowed. I didn't do anything. Cecilia narrowed her eyes, scrutinizing my expression as if she could peel back my mind and look inside. She finally said, drawing out the sound as if trying to decide whether I was lying or just stupid. I sighed. I really don't know, Cecilia. We just talked last night. Talked? Her smirk widened. Is that what we're calling it now? I groaned. Nothing like what you're thinking happened. She tapped her chin with a single manicured finger. Then I suppose Rachel just naturally decided she couldn't live without you. I guess. I offered. Cecilia let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head. You really are dense sometimes, Arthur. I frowned, but she just sighed. Well, whatever happened, I'm sure I'll hear all about it from her later. For now, I'll just say. She leaned in, her breath warm against my ear. I'm looking forward to our time together in the Tower of Magic. I didn't have time to reply before the song ended. Cecilia pulled back, flashing me a wink before stepping away. Before I could even catch my breath, another hand reached for mine. Serafina, I greeted as the silver-haired swordswoman took my hand. She said nothing at first, simply leading me into the next dance. Unlike Cecilia, she didn't tease, didn't pry. She just danced. Serafina was always composed, always graceful, and this was no exception. Even though dancing wasn't her specialty, her natural elegance made up for it. You seem troubled, she finally said as we twirled together. Doi? I asked. She nodded. I assume it's about Rachel. I sighed. Something like that. You don't need to worry so much, Arthur, Serafina said softly. You think too much sometimes. Just let things happen. Her words were simple, but they hit deeper than I expected. The dance ended, and before I could say anything else, she bowed her head slightly. Thank you for the dance, Arthur. I barely had time to step off the dance floor before the last of them found me. Your turn, huh? I said as Rose approached. She huffed, crossing her arms. Finally, I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me. Impossible, I said, extending a hand. She took it and we moved into the dance. Rose was different from the others. Where Cecilia was playful and Serafina was elegant, Rose was straightforward. She followed the steps carefully, a small frown of concentration on her face. You're thinking too much, I teased. I just don't want to step on your feet, she muttered. I grinned. You're doing fine. She let out a breath. Good. Because I didn't come all this way to embarrass myself. The dance continued, and by the time it ended, she was smiling. See? Not so bad, I said. She rolled her eyes. I'll let you have that one, Arthur. And with that, my night of dancing finally came to an end. Chapter 223. Rachel sauntered up to me, looking far too pleased with herself, her sapphire eyes practically twinkling with mischief. She hooked her arm through mine, her grip light but possessive, and let out a giggle that was entirely too pleased for my comfort. Spoil me today, Arthur, she declared, as if this were some royal decree and I was her humble attendant. After all, I only get one sweet 16 in my life. If you wish to be spoiled, I don't mind, I said, watching her closely. She was practically vibrating with joy, her usual composed demeanor entirely abandoned. Seeing her like this, so carefree, so incandescently happy, was infectious. A warmth spread in my chest, though I wasn't quite sure what to do with it. Rachel's gaze turned sly, a flicker of something conspiratorial dancing behind her eyes. I wonder, she mused, tilting her head just slightly. I want to kiss you again. Her words were bold, but the instant they left her lips, a furious blush overtook her face. She averted her gaze, suddenly fascinated by the ground, her fingers tightening slightly around my arm. Ratch? I started, but she cut me off with a pout, a tiny huff escaping her lips. I know, she said, her voice quieter now. I know there's something you're not telling me, something big, something that keeps getting in the way of us. She took a deep breath and met my eyes again, determination replacing her usual warmth. I'll wait for you to figure it out, to fix it. But you better fix it, Arthur. A small smile tugged at my lips. Thanks, Rachel. We stood there for a moment, smiling at each other, a silent understanding passing between us. And then, just as I was beginning to think this might actually be a perfect moment, a cold prickle ran down my spine. Someone was approaching. I looked up. Alastor Creighton, Rachel's father. The kind of man who could probably make entire rooms go silent just by existing in them. He had the presence of someone who always knew exactly what was happening, exactly what he wanted to happen, and precisely how to make those two things the same. Arthur, he said, voice like rough stone, cutting through the warmth of the moment like a laser blade. Rachel moved before I could, stepping in front of me like a shield. Father, Arthur is my friend, she said, her voice steady, but her posture taut, defensive. I know, Alastor said, nodding once. His gaze flicked to me, sharp and unreadable. I need to speak with him, privately. It's important. Rachel didn't budge. No, she said flatly. Alastor raised a brow. No, you heard me. She crossed her arms, standing her ground. If it's important, you can say it here. A muscle twitched in Alastor's jaw. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by his own daughter. I sighed, placing a hand on Rachel's shoulder. It's fine, Ratch, I said. Her eyes snapped to mine, searching my face for any hint of hesitation. Arthur, you don't have to. I'll be fine, I assured her. It's just a conversation. Rachel didn't look convinced, but after a long moment, she let out a frustrated sigh and stepped aside, though she shot her father a glare that promised consequences if anything happened. Alastor, for his part, barely acknowledged the exchange. He turned and walked away, fully expecting me to follow. I did. The two of us exited the hall. Luna's voice slipped into my mind like a whisper through silk. He put a soundproof barrier. I hadn't even noticed the mana shift, but sure enough, as Alastor and I walked, an invisible field settled over us. A casual flick of power from a man used to moving the world without anyone realizing he'd done it. Arthur, Alastor said, his voice as steady and measured as ever. Do you know about my wife? There were a lot of ways I could answer that question, most of them inadvisable. I settled on the obvious. Queen Isolde Creighton? I asked, tilting my head. Didn't Her Majesty pass away? Alastor watched me, not just looking but watching like a scientist studying an unfamiliar creature that might or might not be venomous. I kept my expression carefully blank. Just the right mix of polite curiosity and mild confusion. Not an ounce of recognition. He exhaled sharply. She's alive. That was hardly a surprise. What was a surprise was that he was telling me. I'll keep this brief, Alastair continued. 11 years ago, she lost her mind and hurt Rachel while Kathleen and I were away. When I returned, I sealed her. Since then, she's barely existed. She eats, she sleeps, but she doesn't speak, doesn't react, doesn't ask for anything. His voice didn't change, but something about the way he said it made me think it had been bothering him. The Creighton patriarch did not strike me as a man who liked loose ends. Until now, he added. I frowned. Until now. Alastair's gaze sharpened. The first thing she said after 11 years of silence was that she wanted to meet you. I stopped mid-step. That wasn't supposed to happen. I knew about Isolde. She never asked to meet anyone. She's a seer, right? Luna's voice nudged at my thoughts. You're fateless. Maybe that's why. I considered that. Maybe. Alastair was still watching me, like I was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. So, he said, voice cool, I'll ask again. What are you? I didn't answer. He could stare as much as he liked. Some things were better left unexplained. His eyes narrowed, but he let it drop, turning away and continuing down the hall. I followed, my mind running circles around itself. Why would a woman who had abandoned the world for over a decade suddenly want to see me? We moved through the Creighton estate, passing through halls that grew progressively darker and quieter, the usual futuristic displays of opulence giving way to something emptier. This was a place meant to be forgotten. We stopped in front of an unassuming door. Alastair placed his palm against it and closed his eyes. Even I could feel the weight of the seal unraveling, a sensation like a taut wire snapping, power uncoiling in invisible waves. Isn't this dangerous? I asked. Alastair didn't even look at me. If she tries anything, I can stop her. His tone carried the easy certainty of a king. With a casual flick of his fingers, the seal was undone, and before I could think twice, he sent me inside. The room was quiet. Not just silent, but quiet. A deep, settled kind of stillness, the kind that suggested nothing much had happened here for a very long time. A woman sat by the window. The lights above hummed softly, casting a warm glow over golden hair that shimmered just like Rachel's. But there was something different, something older, something weightier. Rachel was a flame, bright and vibrant. Isolde Creighton was like a candle in a sealed room, a light that had flickered and burned itself down to the wick. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge my entrance at all. Still, I bowed. I greet your majesty. No reaction. The woman who had spent 11 years in silence had finally spoken. And now she was silent again. Interesting, Isolde murmured, and in the blink of an eye, the space between us ceased to exist. One moment, she was by the window, distant and untouchable. The next, her fingers were under my chin, lifting my face as if inspecting a particularly curious specimen. I swallowed hard. It wasn't just her presence, though that alone felt like standing in the eye of a storm, but the sheer weight of her existence pressing down on me. Isolde Creighton wasn't just a person. She was an eight-circle mage, a woman who had been powerful enough to be sealed rather than fought. And she was much, much stronger than I was right now. How very interesting, she said again, her voice carrying the same tone one might use when discovering that a cockroach had somehow developed sentience and begun reciting poetry. An anomaly like you exists in the world. A world that is doomed. A world that will fall. Her fingers left my chin, but the sensation lingered like static electricity. She tilted her head slightly, as though listening to something distant, something beyond my ability to hear. Her eyes glowed faintly, shifting in that unsettling way that made it very clear she wasn't just thinking. She was seeing. I didn't move. I simply watched. It wasn't often that someone could make me feel like the least significant thing in the room, but Isolde Creighton had a knack for it. Then, as suddenly as the moment had started, she smiled. How nice, she mused. Ever so slightly, the fate of the world has changed. Luna's voice crackled into my thoughts, her usual sharp confidence replaced with uncharacteristic disbelief. She can read your fate? Pause. How can a human do that? Humans are the most adaptable and the greatest species to ever exist, Isolde said, as though answering a question she hadn't been asked aloud. Her tone carried a quiet amusement, as if she found Luna's shock vaguely adorable. So even if a Chelan like you cannot, I can. I stiffened. You saw her? I asked, unable to mask my surprise. Isolde shrugged, as if this were nothing, as if she hadn't just effortlessly done what even the strongest Radiant rankers had failed to achieve. Not just sensing Luna, but hearing her thoughts. Luna, for once, had no snide remark. I stared at the woman in front of me, for the first time genuinely uncertain of what I was dealing with. What was Isolde Creighton? Chapter 224. Isolde watched me for a long moment, her fingers tapping idly against the armrest of her chair. Then, without a single flicker of visible mana, her voice slipped directly into my mind. You needn't concern yourself with your body being reclaimed by its original soul. It's yours now. I tensed instinctively, not because of what she'd said, but because of how she said it. The connection was seamless, effortless. Even Luna had to push her voice into my thoughts. Isolde had simply been there, like a shadow slipping into place behind me. Out loud, she sighed and leaned back against the chair, a perfectly casual gesture meant to be seen by Alastair, who was no doubt still monitoring from outside. You remind me of someone, she mused, her tone light, reflective. It's unnerving, really. A distraction, a smokescreen. Your soul is fully anchored, stronger than the remnants that lingered before you. Her telepathic voice was smooth, laced with the same detached amusement she had used earlier. There will be no sudden repossession, no past self clawing back control. You are Arthur Nightingale now, whether you like it or not. I had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made something ease in my chest. Not that I was about to let my guard down. Not with her. Are you here to change things? She asked, tilting her head slightly, her words still aimed at whatever unseen audience was watching. That being said, her voice continued in my mind, utterly unfazed by my wariness. You are on a path that will challenge you soon. If you intend to reach mid-integration rank, you'll need to achieve something known as sword resonance. Sword resonance. I'd heard the term before, but I hadn't yet considered what it would take to achieve it. Resonance requires the soul aspect, Isolde continued, her mental voice crisp, efficient. And that will be your first real trial. The body can be strengthened, mana refined. But the soul? That is a different matter entirely. I exhaled slowly, keeping my expression neutral, playing along with her little act. Change things? I said aloud, letting some amusement slip into my voice. You make it sound like I'm some kind of revolutionary. Isolde smiled. Aren't you? When the time comes, she continued mentally, you will have to face a trial. That sounded ominous. And what do you think I am changing? I asked, watching her carefully. She chuckled lightly, waving a hand. Oh, nothing too grand. The world, perhaps. Alastair was no doubt listening. This entire spoken conversation was for him. A meaningless dance of words designed to give the illusion of casual intrigue. But the real conversation, the one that mattered, was happening in silence. Your sword will never reach its full potential without resonance, she pressed. And without it, you will never reach what lies beyond. Sword resonance wasn't just a requirement. It was a threshold. I understood now. I would have to undergo a trial of the soul. And Isolde somehow already knew it. Isolde fell silent, her gaze drifting back to the window as if our conversation had never happened. No dramatic farewells, no cryptic final words. Just a quiet, measured stillness, like a machine powering down. I turned to leave, but just as my hand reached for the door, her voice slipped into my mind one last time. Take care of my daughter, Arthur. This time her tone was different. No detached amusement, no distant wisdom. There was something raw beneath it, something dangerously close to human. Even if she never forgives me, Isolde continued, the weight of the words settling like a whisper on my soul. I wish for her to be happy. And then nothing. I stepped out of the room, the door shutting behind me with a finality that felt heavier than it should have. Alastair was waiting, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Well? He asked. I scratched the back of my head. It was just useless, I said, feigning mild disappointment. Alastair exhaled sharply. Yeah, he muttered. Figured as much. A lie. A man like Alastair Creighton didn't hope for things. He calculated, planned, expected. And yet, despite everything, some part of him must have believed Isolde would say something, anything that would make sense of the past 11 years. Instead, all she'd wanted was to speak with me. Not her husband. Not her daughters. Me. Why? That question curled around my thoughts like smoke. And then there was what she had said at the end. Take care of Rachel. Not a request. Not a command. Just something she needed to say. And that was the problem. Because if she had truly gone mad, If she had lost herself completely, then why had those words carried the weight of a mother's love? I glanced at Alastor. Sorry, I said. He waved a hand dismissively. No need to be. I wasn't expecting much. Another lie. I didn't press. Instead, I let the thought settle, uncomfortable and quiet. Isolde Creighton hadn't hurt Rachel because she had lost her mind. She had done it because she had to. There had been a reason. I didn't know what it was. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever had happened that night, whatever had driven Isolde to do the unthinkable, it hadn't been because she didn't love her daughter. It had been because she did. There's something else, though, I thought, letting the realization settle. Isolde had confirmed it. This body was mine now. Not borrowed, not occupied. Not something that could be snatched back by some long-lost original owner. That door was shut, locked and bolted, and if a past version of Arthur was floating around in some ethereal waiting room, well, tough luck for him. And Isolde wasn't just some half-baked fortune-teller peddling vague prophecies to the gullible. She was a seer, one who outclassed Luna, which was saying something because Luna wasn't exactly lacking in the supernatural insight department. Isolde had seen right through me in a way that bordered on absurd. Which meant I no longer had any excuses. When the second year begins, I'll confess, I thought, exhaling heavily. And then, an even heavier thought hit me square in the face. Am I actually forming a harem? I let that sit for a moment, as if I could somehow blink it out of existence. Nolak. The thought remained, smug and inescapable. Not just any harem, mind you, but one consisting of princesses, plural, and a count's daughter. The kind of thing that should have been some ridiculous, over-the-top fantasy scenario, not my actual growing reality. Sure, my current standing wasn't bad. I was rank 1 among Mythos Academy's first years, Lee Zenith's disciple, and generally considered a rising force in the world. But having status was one thing. Having enough power to keep it was another. And if I wanted to walk a path where I could seriously consider relationships with all of them, I needed more than just talent. I needed power. A lot more power. That's a problem for future me, I decided, shaking my head. But there was something I couldn't push off. I needed to confess. The thought made my ears burn. It wasn't that I was afraid, well, maybe a little, but mostly, it was the sheer weight of it. I had made a promise to respect their feelings, and that meant being honest about mine. Except, how exactly did one confess to 4 different girls? At the same time, would they even want that? I couldn't just assume they'd be fine sharing me, and I had no intention of forcing anything. If any of them wanted exclusivity, I'd have to respect that. Even if it meant difficult choices down the line. The very idea of anyone else trying to date them made something uncomfortable twist in my chest. Which, yes, was hypocritical, but I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. I never liked harems in the first place, I thought, clicking my tongue. And yet, here I was, living in one. How the hell did Lucifer manage this mess? I wondered, because if there was a guidebook on navigating this kind of situation without blowing everything up, I had not been given a copy. After a long moment of overthinking, a different thought slipped in. One that actually made sense. No, it's not quite time for a confession yet. I couldn't rush into something like this blindly. So for now I had to wait. Till the beginning of the second year. Chapter 225. Arthur. Rachel's voice rang out the moment Alastor and I stepped back into the hall. Before I could even process her movement, she had latched onto my arm, curling around it like some sort of overly affectionate, glaring barnacle. Her eyes, currently radiating enough protective fury to make a dragon think twice, were fixed squarely on her father. He didn't scare you or anything, right? She asked, her grip tightening as if she were personally prepared to throw hands with Alastor Creighton, one of the most powerful mages alive. Alastor sighed the long, suffering sigh of a man who had long since resigned himself to fatherhood-induced exasperation. He pinched the bridge of his nose and muttered, "You used to be such a sweet little girl, always running around, 'Daddy, Daddy!'" He shook his head, looking thoroughly betrayed by time itself. And now, the moment a boy enters the picture, this happens. His gaze flicked to me, sharp and distinctly unamused. Rachel, already blushing furiously, practically vibrated with indignation. "Father, don't talk about that." Alastor merely sighed again, the weight of paternal disappointment heavy upon his regal shoulders, and turned away, muttering something about the fleeting innocence of youth. I meanwhile was doing my best not to laugh, because no matter how terrifying he was as a mage, as a king, and as a general force of nature, Alastair Creighton was also, at the end of the day, a dad. And his daughter was currently wrapped around my arm like an overenthusiastic koala, thoroughly ignoring whatever reputation for refined elegance she was supposed to have as a princess. "I'm fine, Ratch," I said, reaching up to pat her head before I even realized what I was doing. Rachel blinked up at me. I froze. "Sorry," I said quickly, already bracing myself. "Do it more," she declared, eyes practically sparkling as she nuzzled closer, looking way too pleased with herself. "Ratch," I started, feeling the stares of the surrounding nobles drilling into my back. "You're being a bit too." "Sorry," she interrupted, utterly unrepentant. Her voice dropped slightly as she whispered near my ear. "I won't do that again in front of everyone, since you don't want people to see that. Right?" I stiffened. Rachel smiled. Somewhere in the background, I could feel Alastair's judgment. It seemed that no matter how powerful I became, there were still some battles I simply wasn't equipped to win. "You are so cute," Rachel giggled, finally peeling herself away from me. Though not entirely, because that would require an unacceptable level of personal space. Our arms remained firmly linked, like she was afraid I might suddenly vanish into the void if she let go. I sighed, though there wasn't much exasperation in it. "Glad you think so." The rest of the birthday ball went by in a blur of music, laughter, and the ever-present, polite suffocation that came with noble gatherings. Rachel, of course, was the center of it all, smiling, twirling, making rounds like the effortlessly charming princess she was. But every now and then, her eyes would flick to me, as if checking to make sure I was still there, still watching. And I was. By the time the ball wound down, guests were beginning to drift away in private carriages, skyships humming as they departed into the night. The grand halls of the Creighton estate, once bursting with light and sound, slowly settled into something quieter, more intimate. It was my last night here. Tomorrow I'd be returning to Avalon. I retired to my room, sinking onto the bed with a deep breath. The day had been eventful. Between Alastair, Isolde, and Rachel being, well, Rachel, my brain felt like it had been through a high-speed crash course in Creighton family dynamics. I let my eyes drift closed. Knock knock. I sighed. Because, of course, the déjà vu hit before I even turned my head. There was only one person who knocked at my door at this hour. I pushed myself up, ran a hand through my hair, and knowing full well what I was getting into, opened the door. Rachel stood there, barefoot, in a loose nightgown that did absolutely nothing to hide the fact that she had zero respect for personal boundaries. Her golden hair cascaded over her shoulders, a few strands falling into her eyes. "Hey," she whispered, as if we were doing something forbidden. I leaned against the doorframe. "Ratch, do you ever sleep at a normal hour?" She grinned. "Not when I have more important things to do." I raised a brow. "And those would be?" Rachel shrugged, stepping past me without waiting for an invitation, because of course she did. "Spending my last night with you before you leave," she said, flopping onto my bed like she owned it. I pinched the bridge of my nose. "You do have your own room, you know?" She stretched her arms above her head, completely ignoring me. "And yet, here I am." I sighed again, closing the door behind her. It seemed my last night at the Creighton estate was going to be interesting. "Your father may genuinely kill me," I said, because some things needed to be acknowledged out loud. Rachel, as expected, did not care. "I won't let him," she said, as if this was a matter of sheer stubbornness and not the will of one of the most powerful men in existence. "I like you too much." She patted the bed beside her, smiling like this was all perfectly reasonable behavior. "Come sit next to me." I hesitated for exactly half a second before doing as she asked, keeping my eyes firmly forward in an attempt at self-preservation. "I didn't tell you why I cried last night, did I?" Rachel asked. That caught me off guard. I blinked, then shook my head. She exhaled, leaning back slightly, eyes drifting somewhere far beyond the walls of the room. "When I was about 5 years old, my mother went insane," she said, the word heavy with something unsaid. "She started hurting me, physically, and there was nothing I could do to stop her. I didn't speak. I simply listened. My father and sister weren't home. It was just me, and my mother was strong, a mage beyond anything I could have resisted. She used me as a hostage, and no one could do anything about it." A pause, a quiet inhale. "My father tried to come back, but the North was in chaos. If he had abandoned the front lines completely, the entire region would have collapsed. He wanted to return, but he couldn't. Not yet. And then, softly, when he did come back, he sealed my mother. And that was the end of it. I waited, because she wasn't finished. Rachel turned to me, her expression unreadable. It happened on my birthday. I felt something tighten in my chest. This is a Creighton family secret, she said quietly. I'm telling you because that's how much I trust you, Arthur. Because I love you. The words landed between us, weighty in a way that had nothing to do with simple affection. You will never, ever hurt me, she continued, certainty ringing in every syllable. I know that. So tell me, do you love me? I do, I said. Simple. Honest. I loved Rachel. Just as I loved Rose. And Serafina. And Cecilia. Once the world had been gray. Dull. Now it was alive with color. Rachel studied me for a moment, then smiled. A touch wry. But you love them too, don't you? Yes, I admitted. She sighed dramatically. Quite the ambition, making a harem of princesses and a count's daughter, she teased, shaking her head like I was some sort of hopeless case. Before I could reply, she lunged forward, wrapping her arms around me and pulling me against her in a tight embrace. My face met her shoulder, her warmth seeping into my skin. Shoo! She murmured, pressing closer. Let me do this. For revenge. I started, only to be thoroughly ignored. Rachel rested her chin on my shoulder. I love you so much, Arthur, that even sharing you, I don't mind that much. My breath caught. So I'll wait, she continued, for you to confess properly. And then, before I could process any of that, she leaned in and kissed me. Soft, warm, certain. When she finally pulled away, she smiled, smug, fond, victorious. Let's sleep together, she said. My brain short-circuited. Rachel, realizing what she had just said, promptly turned scarlet. You pervert, she huffed, crossing her arms. I didn't mean that kind of sleeping. If we did do that now, my father would kill you. I wasn't thinking of that. I shot back, feeling my own face heat up. Liar, Rachel said, unimpressed. At least try to keep your eyes up. I sighed, shaking my head, but resistance was a lost cause. Rachel had made up her mind, and when Rachel made up her mind, the rest of the world simply had to deal with it. She gave me exactly half a second to brace myself before pushing me down onto the bed with the authority of someone who had decided she was in charge of the situation. Which, to be fair, she absolutely was. Without hesitation, she curled up beside me, snuggling in with all the determination of a particularly clingy cat. One arm draped over me. Her forehead rested lightly against my shoulder. She fit into my side like she'd always belonged there, which was, honestly, a little terrifying. Good night, Arthur, she murmured, voice already soft with sleep. I exhaled, letting my body relax, though my brain was still flailing in the background, trying to process the sheer absurdity of my life. Good night, Ratch, I said, my voice quieter than I expected. And just like that, the warmth of her presence, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the sheer reality of it all settled over me. Tomorrow I'd return to Avalon. Tomorrow, everything would continue. Challenges, responsibilities, an uncertain future. But for now, just for tonight, Rachel was here, curled against me, and that was all that mattered. Sleep came easier than I expected. Chapter 226. The morning came far too quickly. I groggily opened my eyes to find that Rachel was still clinging to me. Her golden hair sprawled over my chest, her breathing slow and steady, the warmth of her body against mine, the faint scent of her lingering perfume. It was dangerously comfortable. For a brief, fleeting moment, I allowed myself to enjoy the quiet. Then, knock knock. My brain, still foggy with sleep, barely processed it. Then the door opened, and standing there, framed in the morning light, was Kathleen Creighton. I froze. Rachel didn't even stir, blissfully unaware of the impending disaster. Kathleen's gaze flicked over the room, landing on me. Still in bed, then at Rachel, draped over me, before settling back on me with the slow, deliberate calculation of someone mentally filing this information away for future use. I was looking for Rachel, she said, her voice as calm as ever. She wasn't in her room. I opened my mouth. No words came out. Kathleen nodded to herself, as if this confirmed some private theory. Ah, I see. Rachel finally stirred, blinking blearily. Arthur, what time is? She stopped mid-sentence as her brain caught up to the fact that her sister was standing right there, watching us. A pause. Then, oh no. Kathleen, to her credit, didn't look too smug. Just a little. You know, she mused, tapping a finger against her chin. If you two were planning to elope, you could have at least left a note. Rachel made a noise that could only be described as an indignant squeak before promptly burying her face into my chest to avoid reality. I meanwhile was trying and failing to remember how to breathe. Kathleen let the silence linger just long enough to make us suffer before casually turning to leave. Anyway, she said airily. Father's expecting you downstairs soon, Arthur. Don't keep him waiting. Oh, and Rachel. Rachel, still refusing to lift her head, made a muffled sound of protest. Next time, at least pretend to be sneaky about it. With that, Kathleen shut the door behind her, leaving us both red-faced and reeling. Rachel groaned into my chest. I'm never going to hear the end of this. I sighed, staring up at the ceiling. Neither am I. So much for a peaceful morning. Rachel had gone off to her room to change, leaving me with a moment to myself. I used it to freshen up, splash some cold water on my face, and try to convince myself that I hadn't just barely survived one of the most embarrassing mornings of my life. It didn't help. And Luna, being the supportive partner she was, only made it worse. Wow, I think my contractor might die, she said, her tone as dry as a desert. Shut up, I shot back, stepping out of my room and making my way down the hall. And then I stopped. Because sitting at the head of the dining table, where breakfast was neatly laid out, was Alastair Creighton. And he was glaring at me. The kind of glare that made lesser men reconsider their life choices. Arthur Nightingale, he said, his voice measured but carrying weight. I straightened instinctively, feeling the oppressive pressure of his manna settle over me. Yes. Return it, he said. I blinked. Return what? Alastair gritted his teeth. My daughter. Give me my daughter back. I stared at him, then almost laughed. I did not laugh because I had a very strong attachment to staying alive, and Alastair's aura was currently crushing down on me with the force of a planetary-class gravity well. That's not exactly in my control, I managed. Alastair looked seconds away from summoning a world-ending spell when a golden blur shot past me and planted itself firmly between us. Father, stop bullying Arthur. Rachel huffed, arms crossed, her shorts and t-shirt combination making her look far less like an intimidating noble and far more like a rebellious teenager refusing to be grounded. Alastair, for all his legendary status, had the distinct look of a man realizing he had absolutely zero authority in this situation. Dear, he said, his voice just slightly strained. I wasn't bullying him. I'm not stupid, Rachel shot back. Arthur is someone precious to me. Alastair's expression wavered. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, but no sound came out. His youngest daughter had just declared that in front of him, and his brain was clearly struggling to process it. Meanwhile, Kathleen, sitting at the table, was watching the entire thing unfold with the distinct amusement of an older sibling enjoying quality entertainment. At least I have my other daughter, Alastair muttered, sighing as Kathleen patted his back in a show of there, father, it'll be okay. And just like that, breakfast proceeded as if none of that had happened. Rachel sat next to me, far too pleased with herself. Then, because the universe hates me, Kathleen decided to open her mouth. So, she said, her tone deceptively casual, are you two dating now? Rachel immediately turned red. I, on the other hand, nearly choked on my orange juice. And no, Rachel stammered. Not yet. Arthur has to, tie up some loose ends first. Kathleen raised a brow. What loose ends? Rachel, the traitor, didn't even hesitate. He needs to confess to Cecilia, Serafina, and Rose, she said, as if this was a completely normal thing to say. I groaned internally. Kathleen, meanwhile, went from mildly entertained to staring at me like I was clinically insane. And Alastair narrowed his eyes. So my daughter isn't good enough for you? He asked, voice deceptively calm. I froze. Wait, hold on. Wasn't he just threatening me for dating her? I was so confused. Are you stupid? Luna scolded, her voice sharp in my mind. Just imagine, your youngest teenage daughter brings home a boy, and not just any boy, but one who is planning to have a harem of 4 girls. And that boy is you. What do you mean, someone like me? I shot back, feeling vaguely insulted. She ignored me, which honestly was fair. Because, unfortunately, she was right. Across the table, Alastor folded his hands together, smiling the kind of smile people usually reserved for someone they were about to very politely kill. "Arthur," he said, his tone all warmth and friendliness, his mana pressure doing its best impression of an industrial-grade compactor. "I think I should reward my daughter's future boyfriend." That word, future, carried just enough menace to make my survival instincts go into high alert. "How about some personal training?" Alastor suggested, the friendliness in his voice now distinctly predatory. "Your spellcasting could improve quite a bit with the right instruction." While that was technically true, the odds of me surviving whatever training Alastor had in mind were significantly lower than I was comfortable with. "I'd love to, but I'm actually heading to the Tower of Magic," I said, declining in the most diplomatic way possible. "I'll be training under Archmage Charlotte." The moment I said it, the temperature in the room dropped by a few degrees. Alastor's fingers tapped against the table. Kathleen stilled. Rachel winced. Because, of course, I had just casually mentioned one of the taboo topics in the Creighton estate. The Tower of Magic and the Creighton family had been locked in an icy, deeply political standoff for years. It wasn't open war, but it was the kind of hostility that made people choose their words carefully. So why had I said it? Because, frankly, this world had too many divisions. The world wasn't fully united against the demons and the miasmic species. Of course, it wasn't completely divided either, but cracks existed. The conflict between the Creightons and the Tower of Magic was just one of many fractures. And sooner or later, if people wanted to actually win this war, those fractures needed to be addressed. Alastor's gaze on me grew sharper. Rachel nudged me under the table in silent warning. And then, just as I was preparing for Alastor to double his mana pressure, Luna's voice cut in. "You know, the harem ending is actually the best option here." "What?" I replied, distracted. "Just seduce and marry all the princesses and other powerful women in the world," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Then you can unify the world as its sole emperor." I nearly choked on my drink. "Luna, that is not a political strategy. Worked for ancient monarchies," she pointed out. "You'd just be optimizing it." Meanwhile, back in reality, Alastor's gaze stayed unreadable for a moment longer before he exhaled sharply and stood. "Fine," he said, voice calm. "Go to the tower. Train with Charlotte." I nodded, sensing the conversation was over. Breakfast continued in an awkward, tense silence. By midday, I was preparing to leave. One of the Creighton family's self-driving cars, sleek, black, and unmistakably expensive, was already waiting outside, primed to take me to the airport for my flight to Avalon. Rachel stood beside me at the entrance, arms crossed, eyes shining with just a hint of irritation. "I still don't like that you're leaving so soon," she grumbled. I smiled. "You say that like I won't see you again soon." She huffed. "Not soon enough." Kathleen, standing a few steps away, just shook her head in amusement. Alastor, mercifully, had chosen to not personally oversee my departure, possibly to avoid any further existential crises regarding his youngest daughter's life choices. "Try not to miss me too much," I teased. Rachel narrowed her eyes. Then, before I could react, she grabbed my collar, pulled me down, and kissed me. Short, firm, undeniably smug. By the time she pulled away, I was certain my ears were red. "There," she said, looking far too pleased with herself. "Now you have something to think about on your way back to Avalon." Kathleen coughed pointedly. "Cleared my throat, right? Well, I should." Rachel pushed me towards the car. "Go, go, before I decide to keep you here forever." And so, with my dignity barely intact and Luna definitely laughing in my mind, I boarded the car and set off for the airport for my flight to Avalon. I had a lot to think about, and, thanks to Rachel, no chance of thinking about anything else for the entire trip. Chapter 227, Tower of Magic. I returned to Avalon City. 2 nights at the Creighton estate had felt like a full-blown saga. The same could be said for my time at the Mount Hua sect. Rachel and Seraphina had made their feelings painfully clear, which meant that now only Cecilia and Rose remained. And, conveniently enough, I was about to meet both of them at the Tower of Magic. Cecilia's presence there made perfect sense. She was Charlotte Alaric's disciple. The tower wasn't directly under the control of the Slatemark family, which naturally made the Emperor nervous. He wanted influence over it, and what better way than through his daughter? Of course, Cecilia wasn't just a political pawn. She had thrived under Charlotte's tutelage, growing into a spellcaster on par with Rachel. Rose, on the other hand? I had no idea why she was there. I spent one night at home before heading to the tower, catching up with my parents and Arya. A brief return to normalcy before diving back into the ever-growing chaos of my life. The Tower of Magic loomed ahead as I arrived. A sleek, imposing structure rising a full kilometer into the sky, its surface gleaming under the morning sun. Stepping inside, I moved toward security for verification. The receptionist, a neatly dressed woman, greeted me with a polite smile, one that quickly flickered into surprise as her eyes darted to the screen in front of her. Then, just as quickly, she composed herself. "Please make your way to the top floor," she said, handing me a black card. "This will grant you access." She bowed slightly before adding, "I hope you enjoy your time here, Master's disciple." I nodded. "Thank you." Taking the card, I stepped into the elevator, tapping it against the reader before selecting floor 200. The ride was smooth and unnervingly fast. A few seconds later, the doors slid open, revealing the highest level of the tower, a space that served as both the research hub and personal quarters of the Tower Master. Charlotte was already waiting. "You're here," she said as I stepped inside her office. "Greetings, Master," I said, bowing. Charlotte sighed dramatically. "Honestly, I forgot how incredible you are." Then, before I could react, she was suddenly right in front of me, closing the distance with the kind of speed that made my instincts scream. I flinched, which only made her smirk. "You're already the most fascinating person I've seen," she mused. "Aside from that boy." I narrowed my eyes. "That boy? Lucifer Windward," she said. I could have guessed. For a split second, something in me bristled. "So I'm still second to him, huh?" I shoved the thought away. "Not worth thinking about." "So, Master," I said, refocusing, "what exactly will I be doing here?" Charlotte leaned against her desk, tilting her head slightly. "You're aiming for integration rank soon, aren't you?" I nodded. She smiled. "I ran a full analysis of your gift. Based on my findings, you'll be able to cast Six Circle spells the moment you complete the first stage of integration." Charlotte continued, her expression sharp. "I'll be teaching you a method of Six Circle casting that very few people in the world can use. But you can." She let the words settle before adding, "Of course, you're not strong enough to apply it just yet. But in a few months." She trailed off, her meaning clear. "I would be. And since I am a generous master," Charlotte continued, waving a hand lazily, "I've made sure you won't be completely miserable here." She smirked. "You have two very close friends here to keep you company. Rose Springshaper and Cecilia Slatemark." Charlotte leaned back, looking entirely too pleased with herself. "Your rooms are on floor 100, the highest level for guest quarters. And, conveniently, only the three of you have rooms there." I blinked. "Just us." "Just you," she confirmed. "Consider it an exclusive club. A very dangerous one, if I may add." I exhaled, already sensing the incoming chaos. Charlotte gave me a knowing look. "Anyway, I'll give you today to settle in and relax. Training starts tomorrow." "Understood. Thank you, Master," I said, bowing. She waved a hand dismissively, already turning back to her work. Taking the cue, I stepped out of her office and made my way to the elevator. "You're right. I completely flipped them. Let's fix that and keep their personalities consistent." The ride down was as smooth as ever, and as soon as the elevator doors slid open, I stepped onto floor 100. The space was impressive. Unlike the sterile, polished hallways of the rest of the tower, this level was more personalized. The lighting was softer, the walls lined with faintly glowing runes, and the entire area had the feel of a private penthouse rather than a training facility. A large common lounge stretched out before me, with sleek furniture and a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a stunning view of Avalon's skyline. And, of course, waiting for me in the middle of it all was Cecilia Slatemark. She was lounging on one of the chairs, arms draped lazily over the backrest, her long golden braids spilling over her shoulder. Her crimson eyes flicked to me the moment I stepped inside, glinting with their usual amused sharpness. "Well, well," she drawled, lips curling into a knowing smile. "Look who finally made it." I sighed. "Not even 30 seconds in and you're already teasing me." Cecilia grinned. "You did keep two beautiful girls waiting, Arthur. That's very rude." Before I could respond, another figure appeared from one of the side halls, Rose Springshaper. Unlike Cecilia's casual amusement, Rose's expression was calm, her sharp brown eyes watching me with quiet assessment. Her long auburn hair was tied into a simple ponytail, and her posture was straight, disciplined, every movement measured. "Arthur," she said, her tone steady, professional. "Welcome to the tower." I nodded. "Good to see you both." Cecilia leaned forward slightly. "Oh? No dramatic declarations of how much you missed us." "No, I couldn't survive a moment without you, Cecilia." I rolled my eyes. "I just got here." Rose crossed her arms. "Charlotte said training starts tomorrow, so use today to rest." Cecilia's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Yes, rest. Not strategizing how you're going to confess to me, Serafina," and Rose all at once. "Not thinking about how unfairly beautiful I am." I exhaled slowly. "I am resting. Or at least I was trying to." Cecilia just laughed. "Come on, check out your room. You'll like it." I walked down the hall to the door labeled with my name, scanned my hand on the panel, and watched as it slid open with a quiet hiss. Inside, the room was nothing short of luxurious. A massive bed dominated the center, complete with some of the softest-looking sheets I'd ever seen. A desk sat in one corner. Thermostat on the wall adjusted the temperature to perfection. And the view. An entire wall was glass, giving me an unobstructed look at Avalon's skyline. The city stretched out beneath me like a sea of shimmering lights, reminding me of just how far I'd come. I let out a slow breath. For the first time in weeks, I had a moment to myself. No training, no fighting, no complicated emotions. Just a moment of quiet before the storm. Chapter 228. The next morning, training began. Cecilia was refining her mastery over 5-circle magic, her emerald eyes focused as she layered complex formations with terrifying ease. Rose, ever the disciplined fighter, was working on 4-circle magic, her approach precise and controlled. And me? I was alone in studying 6-circle magic theory. Charlotte stood in front of me, watching with that sharp, amused glint in her eyes, the one that always meant I was about to suffer. "As you know," she began, pacing slightly, "spellcasting within the magic circle system has its variations, but it's nowhere near as diverse as martial arts. At its core, a spellcaster's strength depends on 4 factors: mana weaving, spell potency, multicasting capability, and casting speed." I nodded, absorbing the information. "Different spellcasting methods can improve these factors," she continued, "but not by a lot. The real difference between mages comes from how they utilize their talents." Then she smiled, and not the good kind of smile. "The method I'll be teaching you," she said, "relies on something called signature casting. It's a technique that only mages with an advanced mind aspect can pull off." I frowned. "Signature casting?" Charlotte raised a hand, and mana gathered instantly. "Most mages form their spell circles manually before activation," she explained, crafting a perfect 6-circle array in midair, layer by layer, rune by rune. I watched closely as the glowing magic hummed before her. "But signature casting," she continued, "lets you compress an entire spell into a stored form inside your mana flow, engraving it like an instinctive pattern. Instead of reconstructing the circle every time, you call upon the stored signature instantly." With a flick of her fingers, the entire 6-circle array collapsed inward, shrinking into a single compressed rune hovering above her palm. My eyes widened slightly. "Instead of building a new spell structure every time you cast," Charlotte said, her voice edged with amusement, "you remember it." I immediately saw the advantage. Speed. 6-circle magic was notoriously slow to cast. But with signature casting, I could store my most used spells and deploy them instantly. "But," Charlotte added, waving her hand and dispersing the formation, "this isn't something you can just pick up in a day. You won't be able to cast 6-circle magic yet, but you can start engraving signatures." I nodded. "Understood." She smirked. "Good. Then start by using Lucent Harmony." I blinked. My gift. Unlike normal spells, Lucent Harmony wasn't something I constructed. It was an innate ability woven into my very being, an extension of who I was. Which meant, "You need to apply the principles of signature casting to your gift," Charlotte confirmed, watching my expression shift. "You already have a natural affinity for stabilizing and harmonizing mana. This method will push that even further." I exhaled slowly, then nodded. "All right." I closed my eyes, tapping into Lucent Harmony. The air around me shifted as light mana flowed through my core, resonating with an almost natural frequency. Normally, when I used my gift, it spread outward, stabilizing external mana, enhancing other spells, and allowing adaptive casting. But now, I had to compress it. Not release. Not expand. Condense. Charlotte spoke softly. Don't force the resonance outward. Pull it inward. Let your mana imprint it like an internal signature. I focused. The usual glow of lucent harmony appeared around me, but instead of letting it expand into its normal passive field, I tried to fold it back into myself. The first attempt failed instantly. The natural resonance of my gift resisted. It wanted to spread, to interact, to stabilize the external world. But I needed to make it internal. I tried again, and again, and again. Hours passed as I continuously shaped, compressed, and failed. But each failure brought me closer. Finally, after what felt like dozens of attempts, something clicked. The resonance didn't just collapse, it shifted. Instead of dispersing into the environment, it settled within my mana flow, partially imprinting itself as a signature. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't ready. But the foundation was there. Charlotte smiled, clearly pleased. Not bad, she admitted. At this rate, you'll have a fully engraved signature by the time you complete the first stage of the integration process. I exhaled, rolling my shoulders. That's the goal. Charlotte stretched, stepping back. That's enough for today. Go rest. I nodded, stepping away. I wasn't there yet, but I was on my way. Arthur. Charlotte's voice cut through the air, her sharp gaze pinning me in place. I stopped mid-step, turning back to meet her narrowed eyes. Yes, I asked, already sensing a lecture coming. She sighed, rubbing her temples as if my mere existence was giving her a migraine. Don't rush. I blinked. Rush. I can feel it, she said, folding her arms. That need to push yourself forward. That urge to reach integration rank as soon as possible. She exhaled, shaking her head. Because Lucifer is going to reach it soon, isn't he? I didn't respond. I didn't have to. We both knew the answer. Charlotte watched me for a moment, then sighed again, softer this time. Arthur, the integration process isn't just another rank up. It's different, special, and it's dangerous if you force it before you're ready. I nodded, bowing slightly. I understand. Her lips pressed together. She didn't look convinced. Make sure you do, she muttered. I left the training hall, her words echoing in my mind. Don't rush. She was right, of course. People with overwhelming talent, Lucifer, Cecilia, Ian, the others in Class 1A, could afford to force advancement, pushing themselves into integration before their souls were fully prepared. But the cost? A sacrifice of their soul aspect, the very foundation of their future growth. Lucifer had already made that mistake once. He had forced his breakthrough to white rank too early, burning through his potential. The result? It had taken him nearly a year just to stabilize enough to begin the integration process. He was still powerful, yes, but if he had waited, he could have been even stronger. I wasn't about to make the same mistake. Back on the 100th floor, I found Cecilia and Rose in the lounge, their training robes still slightly rumpled from the day's exercises. The cityscape of Avalon sprawled beyond the glass walls, neon lights flickering like distant stars. Rose sat upright, reading through a thick magical codex, her red ponytail swaying slightly as she turned the page. Cecilia, on the other hand, was sprawled across the couch in the most unnecessarily elegant way possible, sipping a fruit drink with a bemused expression. Finally done with your secret meeting with Charlotte? Cecilia asked, tilting her head. She didn't scold you too harshly, did she? She told me not to rush my integration, I said, sitting across from them. Cecilia's smile turned knowing. Ah, the old patience is a virtue speech. She sipped her drink, watching me over the rim of the glass. She's right, you know. You're so talented, Arthur. It would be a shame if you burned yourself out trying to keep up with someone else. I raised an eyebrow. You're being surprisingly supportive. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. What can I say? I like my men ambitious, but not self-destructive. Rose coughed, loudly and pointedly, without looking up from her book. I sighed. So, how was your training today? Painful, Rose muttered, but productive. I managed to refine my control over illusions. I can distort spell patterns on command now instead of by accident. That's terrifying, I said honestly. Her lips quirked slightly. It is. Cecilia stretched, her golden braids sliding over her shoulder. As for me, I've been perfecting multi-layered illusions. I can now stack 3 simultaneous environments, each one reinforced against detection. Soon, I'll be able to make an entire city think they're living in a completely different world if I feel like it. That's also terrifying. She beamed. I know, right? I exhaled, shaking my head. Between the two of you, I'm beginning to fear for my sanity. Oh, Arthur, Cecilia purred, shifting closer, her emerald eyes practically sparkling. You should fear for your sanity. Being surrounded by 2 beautiful, powerful women must be so overwhelming for you. Rose sighed. Here we go. I ignored her, eyeing Cecilia carefully. Once, she would have said something like that and meant it. Not the compliment, but the idea of toying with me. The old Cecilia had seen people as playthings, amusements to be discarded when she got bored. But now, her teasing was still there, still sharp as ever, but it was different. There was affection behind it now. She flirted with me not because she was testing me, not because she wanted to see if I would dance to her tune, but because she genuinely liked me. She had changed. She wasn't treating me like a toy. She was treating me like Arthur. And that was enough to make me smile. Cecilia must have noticed because she arched a brow. Something on your mind? I shook my head. Just thinking. About how stunning I am? She guessed, grinning. I rolled my eyes. Sure. Let's go with that. Cecilia laughed, leaning back against the couch, her expression softer now. Good answer. Rose closed her book with a thud, standing up. If you two are done being ridiculous, I'm heading to the training hall. She glanced at me. You coming? I hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, let's go. Cecilia made a dramatic sigh. Fine, fine, go be responsible. I'll be here, waiting for my next chance to torment you. I smirked. I'm sure you will. Cecilia had moved past her old way of seeing people as tools, at least for me. Chapter 229. Time at the Tower of Magic had settled into something oddly pleasant. There were no life-threatening battles, no surprise assassination attempts, and no ancient evils clawing at the edges of reality. Instead, each day brought disciplined training, long hours of research, and the occasional headache-inducing lecture from Charlotte about why thinking too much could sometimes be a bad thing. It was a strange kind of peace, a rare, almost suspicious quiet that made me wonder if I wasn't missing something important. One evening, as the sky beyond the tower's curved windows glowed with Avalon's neon skyline, I found myself sitting in the lounge with Rose as Cecilia was still training. The air was cool and filled with a gentle hum of mana energy that vibrated softly through the floor. Rose had been unusually quiet, her usual calm demeanor even more pronounced, as if she were weighing a decision in the silence of her mind. Finally, unable to hold back my curiosity any longer, I turned to her and asked, "Why are you here anyway?" She met my gaze with her characteristic auburn eyes, which were thoughtful and deep. "For you," she replied, flatly and without a trace of hesitation. I blinked, momentarily taken aback by her directness. Well, that was direct. I had expected a rehearsed explanation or a half-hearted remark about duty and training. Instead, she had given me an answer that left no room for misinterpretation. Rose exhaled slowly, shifting in her seat so that her long red hair cascaded more freely over her shoulder. With her hands resting lightly on her lap, she continued, "I came to the tower because I knew you'd be here. Not just for training, though yes, that was part of it, but because I wanted to spend time with you." She tilted her head slightly, studying my reaction with a mix of vulnerability and determination. "Does that bother you?" I shook my head, smiling. "No. Just surprised." She nodded, as if that was exactly what she expected. Then, after a brief pause that stretched between us like a delicate promise, she added, "Then let's go on a date." I blinked again, trying to process the sudden turn in the conversation. "You're not wasting time, are you?" A small, warm smile played on her lips. "Should I?" she teased. With a smile, I replied, "All right, let's go on a date." Avalon City was alive with its usual hum of activity as we stepped out of the tower. Rose looked every bit the part of someone at ease in this vibrant tapestry of city life. Dressed in a dark red blouse paired with sleek black pants, she exuded an effortless grace. Gone was her training gear. Instead, she had opted for something more casual yet undeniably refined. She had left her hair down, and the long, fiery strands caught the soft glow of the city lights, making her seem almost luminescent in the night. I, in turn, had traded my usual combat-worn clothes for a fitted black shirt and dark slacks, a simple ensemble that managed to be both practical and presentable. "So," I said, glancing at her as we walked, "what's the plan?" She smirked, the challenge sparkling in her eyes. "I thought you'd plan it." I raised an eyebrow. "You asked me out, so shouldn't you be the one planning?" "Maybe," she admitted with a playful shrug. "But I wanted to see where you'd take me." Challenge accepted. After a few minutes of wandering the lit-up streets, I led her to a quiet part of the city where the pace slowed. We ended up at a small, tucked-away tea house that overlooked one of Avalon's elevated gardens. The tea house wasn't fancy by traditional standards. It boasted a charming, almost rustic atmosphere. Hanging lanterns cast a warm, inviting glow over polished wooden tables, and soft instrumental music played in the background. The air was fragrant with the aroma of roasted herbs and citrus, mingled with a subtle hint of the electric tang from the manna-infused soil of the floating garden below. Rose's eyes widened as she took in the surroundings. "You knew I liked tea?" she remarked, a note of genuine pleasure in her voice. "I pay attention," I replied with a smirk. She hummed in approval as we stepped inside. The tea house was sparsely populated, with a few patrons scattered about, most of them absorbed in hollow scrolls or quietly conversing over steaming cups. The ambience was calm, a stark contrast to the hectic energy of Avalon's main districts. We settled into a corner table by a large window that offered an uninterrupted view of the garden below, where delicate plants and softly glowing orbs floated in the air. Soon after, a server approached us. She was a young woman whose tattoos shimmered faintly with each graceful movement, and her notepad glowed softly as she took our orders. "Welcome," she said politely. "What can I get you too?" Rose glanced briefly at the menu before turning her gaze back to me. "You pick," she said, her tone laced with playful confidence. I considered our options and decided on a fireberry blend, a rich, slightly spicy tea that I knew was a favorite among those who appreciated subtle warmth in a cup. Rose raised an eyebrow at my choice but didn't protest. As we waited for our drinks, the conversation naturally deepened. Rose leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, and asked softly, "So, why did you agree to this date?" I met her inquisitive gaze. "Because I wanted to," I replied simply, the words carrying more meaning in the soft, intimate light of the tea house. She studied me for a moment, then smiled. A genuine, tender smile that warmed my heart. "Good answer," she said, and for a moment, the noise of Avalon outside seemed to fade away. Our tea arrived in elegant ceramic cups adorned with swirling patterns that danced in the light. Rose took a careful sip, her eyes widening in appreciation. "This is good," she admitted, her voice soft with contentment. I grinned. "Told you." As we sipped our tea, conversation drifted to topics both mundane and magical. We discussed the challenges of training at the tower, the eccentricities of our instructors, and the ever-present pressures of magical advancement. Rose recounted stories of her childhood with quiet humor, revealing bits of her past that painted a picture of a determined, sometimes rebellious spirit who had always strived to be more than what was expected. I shared my own experiences, the small, often overlooked moments that had shaped my understanding of magic and life. In these shared moments, the space between us seemed to shrink, until it was as if we were the only two people in the world. The candlelight flickered gently over Rose's face, softening her usual stoic expression into something warmer, more inviting. Her crimson eyes, usually so guarded and calculating, now held an unmistakable glimmer of tenderness. "Arthur," she murmured, setting her cup down with deliberate care. I leaned in slightly. "Yeah." She hesitated, her eyes searching mine for a fraction of a heartbeat, before she leaned forward and kissed me. It was soft at first, a gentle brush of lips that gradually deepened as we both surrendered to the moment. The kiss was warm and steady, a quiet declaration of something unspoken and deeply felt. For a brief moment, the chaotic energy of magic, training, and responsibility melted away, leaving only the simple truth of two souls connecting in the heart of Avalon City. When she finally pulled away, a faint blush dusted her cheeks, and her eyes twinkled with a mixture of shyness and resolve. "Was that okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "Yeah, more than okay." She let out a soft laugh, then smirked. "Good, because I don't plan on stopping at just one." I chuckled, shaking my head. "I figured." Outside, As we stepped back onto the bustling street, the neon glow of Avalon continued its relentless pulse. But for that fleeting moment, nothing else mattered. Only the warmth we'd shared, and the promise of something more. The date stretched out like a perfect evening dream. We strolled along riverwalks where water glowed with an internal, magical luminescence, stopped at street vendors selling enchanted trinkets, and shared stories over cups of coffee at a late-night diner that looked like it had been plucked from another era. Every step, every smile, and every touch felt significant, each one a quiet reaffirmation of the bond that was forming between us. As the night deepened, we found ourselves atop a small hill overlooking Avalon's glittering skyline. The city below shimmered like a vast tapestry of lights, the distant hum of airships and the soft murmur of conversation creating a gentle lullaby in the background. We sat side by side on a bench, our shoulders brushing as we admired the view. The cool night air carried the faint scent of jasmine and rain, wrapping around us like a silken promise. Rose turned to me, her eyes reflecting the myriad lights of the city. "I'm glad we did this," she said softly. "I'm really glad I'm here with you." I reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Me too, Rose. Feels, right?" She leaned in closer, her breath warm against my cheek. "Arthur," she whispered, "thank you for not being afraid, for letting me be who I am." There was a long pause as the silence between us grew comfortable, filled with the unspoken hopes of the future. Finally, drawn by an irresistible impulse, I reached for her hand. In that moment, beneath the vast, starry sky of Avalon City, everything felt possible. Then, as if the world itself had given us permission, Rose tilted her head and pressed her lips to mine once more. This kiss was deeper, more assured, and carried with it the full weight of our shared evening. The joys, the uncertainties, and the unspoken dreams of what might come. It was a kiss that sealed the night as something extraordinary, a moment suspended between the magic of Avalon and the certainty of our hearts. Chapter 230. After my date with Rose ended, we both returned to the tower, the quiet hum of mana-infused corridors welcoming us back like a familiar melody. I had expected to feel a sense of uncertainty, maybe even guilt, but instead, there was only clarity. This was the right choice. The date had been more than just an outing, it had been confirmation. A way to make sure of my own feelings, to solidify the nebulous emotions that had been lingering between us. And now I knew for certain. I liked Rose, just as I liked the other three girls. After a brief dinner, I retired to my room. I hadn't seen Cecilia since earlier in the afternoon. Archmage Charlotte had been putting her through some kind of advanced training, forcing her to cast spells without relying on her gift. Knowing Charlotte, it was likely an exercise in sheer magical brutality, the kind that left even prodigies like Cecilia mentally drained by the end of the day. With that thought, I stretched, ready to collapse into bed. Then, just as I pulled the blanket back, a knock echoed against my door. I froze. A sense of déjà vu washed over me. Slowly, I walked to the door, already half expecting what I would find when I opened it. And sure enough, there stood Cecilia, bathed in the soft glow of the hallway's ambient lighting. She was wearing a nightgown that looked far too luxurious to be considered sleepwear, its fabric shimmering subtly with enchanted threads. Her usually meticulously tied golden braid had escaped its confines, loose and cascading over her shoulders in soft, unruly waves. I stared at her. She stared back. There was an intensity in her crimson eyes, something unreadable simmering beneath the surface. "Arthur," she said, voice quiet, but laced with something sharp. "Yes," I replied, instinctively cautious. Without waiting for an invitation, she stepped inside, brushing past me with the air of someone who had already decided exactly how this conversation would unfold. Then she turned, her expression shifting as though a secret had just taken shape between us. "You kissed Rose today, didn't you?" I stiffened. Well, that escalated quickly. Her gaze bore into me, unblinking, expectant. For a fleeting second I considered lying, then immediately dismissed the thought. There was no point. Cecilia wasn't the type to ask a question unless she already knew the answer. So I nodded. Cecilia trembled. Then, before I could react, I found myself pinned to the bed. My brain short-circuited. One moment I had been standing. The next, Cecilia had moved, and I hadn't even registered it. There had been no hostility, no intent to harm, just pure, unfiltered possessiveness. She straddled me, hands planted on my chest, her nightgown slipping slightly off one shoulder. "It's not fair," she whispered, voice trembling. Not with anger but with something far more dangerous. "I found you first." Her fingers curled slightly into the fabric of my shirt. "You are mine." I swallowed. So this was happening. A childish kind of possessiveness, except there was nothing childish about the way her body radiated warmth against mine, or the way her crimson eyes burned with something perilously close to desperation. Cecilia had always been playful, flirtatious even, but this was different. It wasn't just teasing. It was real. And real was dangerous. "Cecilia?" I started carefully, my hands hovering near her waist, unsure whether I should push her off or let her do whatever this was. She leaned in, her breath warm against my neck. "I don't care," she murmured half to herself. "Even if you like the others, even if you kiss them, I won't lose to them." Her fingers trailed up, ghosting over my collarbone. I fought the urge to shiver. She was too close. And yet, she wasn't doing anything more than testing. Testing me. Testing us. The silence stretched, thick with tension. I exhaled, steadying my thoughts, pushing down the sudden, overwhelming urge to do something reckless. "Cecilia," I said again, softer this time. She didn't move. I reached up, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her breath hitched. "You're not going to lose," I told her. Her eyes widened slightly, just for a moment, before she schooled her features back into that haughty, teasing expression. "Humph," she huffed, pulling away ever so slightly. "Good answer." Then, just as quickly as she had pinned me, she rolled off, settling beside me on the bed with the ease of someone who absolutely refused to acknowledge what had just happened. I exhaled slowly. "You're really something else, you know that?" I muttered, rubbing my temple. Cecilia just smirked. "And you," she said, propping herself up on one elbow, "should get used to it." I had a feeling she wasn't just talking about tonight. I sighed, staring up at the ceiling.
Prinzesses, Mann.
After a beat of silence, Cecilia's tone softened further. "I like you so much, you know," she murmured, pressing a hand over her chest as though trying to contain the tumult of feelings threatening to burst forth. "It feels like my heart might actually explode if I don't have you." Her voice, stripped of its usual teasing bravado, was raw and unfiltered, honesty laid bare. I looked at her, knowing I couldn't